All right. So now we got Pepe Escobar with his. What is that? Okay, tell me about the map.
No, come on. This, I think nobody, you and your audience never saw that.
Yeah.
A Chinese map of Xinjiang on the road. And look at this. It has even an identification in English. How fucking cool is that? This was my Bible over there. Obviously, I had to ask for translations every time. I knew more or less the geography, but obviously I didn't know the names.
So you've been traveling. You've traversed China for what, 3 weeks now?
1 month.
1 month. Oh boy.
So this requires detail. It's the trip of a lifetime, Larry, to start with. Number one. And I've been dreaming of this trip since COVID. I was supposed to do this trip in 2020, the year that COVID exploded, because on 2019, I did the other side. I went to Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, and then all the way to the three borders with Xinjiang. And my idea was to do exactly the opposite the next year on the Chinese side. Obviously, COVID and the recovering from COVID in China was a very complicated affair, especially in Shanghai. I was traveling with two Shanghainese, and they gave me details of the lockdowns in Shanghai, and it was really, really, really tough. So I've been waiting for 5 years to do this, and it's not the dream is over, John Lennon style. It's the dream has only begun, in fact, because when you come back to Western China, now in this modernization, let me see if I should have the Bible here. Yes, I do. Xi Jinping's latest book, published in China. This is the English version. It came out in late 2023. So it's the latest. It's a compilation of speeches, reports, comments, etc. And it's fascinating because we see not only his interpretation of the modernization of China, but even little details here and there about global governance, which is what he announced solemnly at the SAO summit in Tianjin. So the timing for this trip was, it was not calculated, but it was an accident of history in an auspicious way. First, there was the summit in Tianjin, where China obviously ripped and Xi himself and his guest of honor, Vladimir Putin.
Right.
Then the October 3 Victory Day parade in Beijing, which we all know stunned the whole planet.
Right.
By what they showed, and especially by what they did not show. And we know they have it.
Yeah.
And this was in parallel with the Vladivostok Forum. I chose to choose the forum. I spent 2 hours in Tianjin. Was crazy. I flew from Europe. I landed in Beijing. I took the high-speed rail to Tianjin, 20 minutes. I stayed there 2 hours, came back to the airport because my flight to Vladivostok was in the afternoon.
Oh my goodness.
The only flight available. No, totally crazy. And then you arrive at Vladivostok airport. He had to do all the, get PCR test,
Right.
all that for us that how it works. Well, so after all that, and after the Vladivostok Forum, the stage was set for the trip. So I flew back to Beijing. And then from Beijing, I spent a few days. I had some very good meetings, including a key off-the-record meeting. This we can discuss among us off the record later with Zhou Bo. Zhou Bo is a former PLA colonel. Is one of the top military analysts of China and one of the top political scientists of China as well. We had an off-the-record lunch in Beijing, which was an absolute killer. What I can tell you, Larry, now, and all of you, our audience, that said, yes, all those weapons that you saw at the parade, of course, we had them and we tested them. But the most important thing is what we did not show.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so this was essential to set the stage. And then I set out to do what I wanted to do for years. And I couldn't do it before, even before COVID, because it was very hard for us foreigners to travel in Xinjiang until COVID, in fact. Retrace the ancient Silk Roads. That was the first part of the trip. So I started in Xi'an, ex-Shangan, imperial capital, during the Tang Dynasty in the 7th and 8th century, had almost 1 million residents, and it was the most sophisticated city on the planet, with the level of sophistication that absolutely unparalleled anywhere else. So that was the start of the Chinese version of the Silk Roads, which is something fascinating. I'll give you an example. The Chinese, now that they launched the new Silk Roads by the big panda himself, in 2013, Belt and Road Initiative, which is essentially a revival in the digital era of the Silk Roads during the Tang Dynasty, which was the apex of the Silk Roads from the 600s to the 900s especially. And of course, the imperial capital was Xi'an, which still today is a city of a level of sophistication that's absolutely extraordinary. So now you arrive in Xi'an, you are in what the Chinese call Tier 2 city. It's not even among the top ones.
Yeah.
Guangzhou, Tianjin, Beijing, Shanghai, etc. But with the history that they have behind and the care that they have to take care of their relics of the past, especially during the Tang Dynasty, is extraordinary. For instance, I was privileged enough to visit the Shanxi History Museum, and I had booked a meeting with one of the curators. So she took me around parts of their collection of Silk Road artifacts, which is something absolutely to die for. And some of the exhibits, they have, let's say, English subtitles, some of them only in Chinese. And they have special exhibitors for different eras in the development of the Silk Road. And then I learned something that I was debating through different sources for a long time. How do the Chinese define the opening of the Silk Road? So the official, we can say that this is now the official Xi Jinping era terminology and qualifications for the opening of the Silk Road. Basically, according to the Chinese, this was during the early Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BC, when an envoy of the Emperor Wu Di, Qianshan, Qianshan was sending 2 different business missions, trade missions, to what the Chinese used to call Western regions. Very important for all of us. These regions were not part of China. They were part of China on and off, and they were part of this very complicated ballet, sometimes militarily, sometimes in terms of paying tribute, between the Chinese and nomadic peoples.
Right.
They could be Turkic peoples, different kind of Turkic peoples. Don't ask Erdogan because he won't even know how to name them. But they say, the Turkic peoples, it's all of us, and we came from Turkestan, which is in Kazakhstan. By the way, he's wrong, because they came from the Altai Mountains. But anyway, that's Erdogan. Tibetans, Uyghurs, Xiongnu tribes from northern China, etc. Kyrgyz, you name it. So this was the back and forth between China proper, continental China proper, and the Western regions. So when the Silk Roads, according to the new Chinese interpretation, started in the 2nd century BC, it was the beginning of trade and constant trade between China and the Western regions, which include, and that now that it gets even more important, Xinjiang, which at the time was not called Xinjiang. At the time, it was basically Turkestan.
Oh, really?
The-
Okay.
is that these were Turkic speaking, because of the Uyghurs, who are a Turkic speaking ethnic group in the west of China, but also Central Asia. All the stands of Central Asia nowadays, at the time, was divided in several kingdoms, principalities, Buddhist kingdoms, etc. I visited a former Buddhist kingdom of the 5th, 6th century in the middle of the desert, the remains of it. And it's something absolutely mind blowing. And it requires explanation to Western audiences that that area in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th century was essentially Buddhist.
Hmm.
And Xinjiang basically became Islamic after the 10th century. So that was much, much later. So when we travel many parts of the Silk Roads, we are traveling the ancient Buddhist Silk Roads. So this was essential for my trip because it was complemented the research that I have done for the past few years and my previous travels in the Silk Roads, because I want to include it in my next book, which is an ambitious project. It's a comparison between the ancient Silk Roads and the new ones.
Oh, okay.
But I want to do it in a rock and roll way, so I can get the younger generations to appreciate, all that swing going on 1,000 years ago,
Yeah.
compared to what's going on now. So then I followed from Xi'an to what is called the Gansu Corridor. Okay, if I showed it on my super map here,
Yeah.
this is the super Xinjiang map. On the northern part, you're going to see the Gansu Corridor, which goes from Xi'an all the way to Dunhuang. And after that, you start to enter into Xinjiang. So I did all the first part of the trip solo. High-speed rail. I flew a little bit. I took a taxi to the desert, literally. I made a deal with a taxi driver because I wanted to see the Jade Gate Pass. And the girls at the hotel, only Chinese, only speaking Chinese, so we were communicating in a very minimalistic way. But he understood what I wanted, and she found a taxi driver, and he loved the idea of taking a lone, crazy foreigner to the desert
But this
in
is
his taxi.
this is the Gobi Desert, right?
Yes, I was south of the Gobi, Larry, and it was fantastic because this Jade Gate Pass is an absolutely essential landmark in the old Silk Roads because it marked the western limit of China for centuries. And there is the remains of the Han Great Wall still preserved. There is a stretch of, I would say, 4 or 5 meter long of the remains of the Han Great Wall, right in the middle of the remains of the Jade Great Pass. So this was one of those illuminating moments in history, where you are in the middle of a place that I've seen. Can you imagine all the caravans that crossed that place back and forth?
Right.
During 1,000 years of the Silk Roads. So then I went back to Lanzhou, capital of province of Guangzhou, where I hit another museum that is probably one of the best museums in Asia, with an unparalleled collection of Silk Road artifacts as well. And when you talk to the people over, obviously they don't have catalogs in English. So even if you get the catalog in Chinese, it's enough for you to understand the quality, the references, and then you find a scholar that talks to you and reiterating the importance of Buddhist Silk Roads in the history of China. So this was the first part of the trip, retracing the ancient Silk Roads historic. The second part, I took the high-speed rail and arrived in Urumqi, capital of Xinjiang, to do something, well, as ambitious, if not more ambitious. We were a small group that set out from Urumqi to shoot a documentary on the road.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So when did you pick up this is where you picked up the film crew, right?
Exactly. This is when I met the film crew. Our cameraman, director of photography, a Russian guy from Buryatia, who studied Chinese in Russia, moved to Shanghai, finishes his studies in Shanghai, and he works in Shanghai. And his companion, which is the head of a marketing firm, Shanghainese, and she was working as his online producer or on-the-ground producer and second camera with an Osmo camera, DJI Osmo camera. This was our shooting crew, and the most important thing, our local Uyghur crowd and team. We travel with Uyghurs, guys who knows everything about the region. Our drivers, crack drivers, we had 4 drivers, all of them Uyghurs.
You mean they were all locked up in a concentration camp?
Exactly. They had to ask a special permission to leave the concentration camp because these guys are foreigners. If we don't serve them, they're going to denounce us. So they made some sort of deal, right?
Yeah, okay.
But they are certified slaves. Yeah. Certified slaves, exactly. So every night they had to sleep outside. They could not sleep in the places where sleeping. They could mix. They eat lousy food everywhere. Right. Okay. So this is was our local Uyghur production team. Yeah. And our local producer for the group, she was a Uyghur, Jenny. She was absolutely amazing. You ask Jenny something, 5 minutes later, detailed response. She booked. She found places. Jenny, I want to visit a silk factory in this oasis. 10 minutes later, it was solved. That kind of stuff. Fascinating. And of course, the itinerary was crazy because I proposed an itinerary that was ultra hardcore because I wanted to visit a list of places, including lost cities in the desert, ancient Buddhist cities, ancient Uyghur cities, and of course, the holy grail of every Silk Road explorer, cross the Taklamakan Desert, which finally, but it gets even better. Not only we crossed the Taklamakan from the northern Silk Road to the southern Silk Road, we followed the oasis of the northern Silk Road. Then we crossed. It took us almost a day to cross, although the conditions are absolutely extraordinary. Can you imagine, Larry, and all of you, our audience, a state-of-the-art highway for 450 kilometer plus, crossing the desert from north to south, with reeds on both sides of the highway. It's what the Chinese call the magic Chinese cube, because these reeds, they prevent the sand to invade
the road.
Armor, right? On top of that, another green fence on both sides protecting the highway. So the sand dunes were very far away from the point of view of the highway. And of course, something that we saw in the beginning and in the end of our crossing, the famous 3,500 kilometer long green belt encircling the whole desert. Harry, when you see this live in front of you, it's beyond mind-boggling because it's a masterpiece of engineering and environmental protection at the same time, and environmental care. The way the highway is built and all the signs, it has everything. Even during most of the itinerary, you have Wi-Fi. Which is
out in the desert?
Have Wi-Fi in the middle of the fucking desert. It's completely crazy, right?
Did they have rest stops, fuel stations,
Not only you have rest stops, field stations. They even built a few scenic view platforms so you can climb a little bit and have a view of the Taklamakan right in front of you to the horizon.
Oh my.
Well, all of you, you're going to see all these images. I just published a few images on my Telegram, but we are saving everything, of course, for the documentary. We shot 2 terabytes of images. Like Stan was working 15, 18 hours. He was shooting everything inside. So we have absolutely extraordinary images, and many of them, I would say most of them, never seen before in the West. Another example, when we crossed via the highway, which is the, officially authorized Chinese way to cross the desert, the next day we did something even crazier. We actually had to face the dunes with our 4x4s because we went to visit what the locals call the lost tribe of the Taklamakan, which is basically a small settlement of 50 families or so in the middle of the desert. And the only way to get there is through the dunes.
Huh.
That was this is off-road heaven, obviously. Very tough trip. I love off-road, but it's really, really hardcore. But our drivers, the guys were absolutely extraordinary. When we get there, it's even more extraordinary. So you have this mini. I would say there are one main street with a few businesses and another street with a few houses. A huge tower, guess what? For Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And a mini lake on the side. And then we start to meet the locals, and they say, look, we have something to show you guys. You know what they're doing? They're building a series of relatively very comfortable bed and breakfasts to serve this budding off-road crowd in China. There are a lot of ultra heavy metal fans of off-road in China. We crossed some of them in the dunes, with Chinese jeeps equipped to the hilt, usually tank jeeps. By the way, tank jeeps you've seen tank jeeps in Moscow, I'm sure, Larry. Tank jeeps are they are better. They are so good that they are kicking out Toyota Land Cruisers out of the market in China.
Wow.
Nobody wants Toyota Land Cruiser anymore. They want a Chinese tank jeep. So, you see tank jeeps all over the place. And of course, going to this place is the holy grail of off-road in China, literally, in the middle of the desert, right?
Right.
So, I'm giving you just little examples of. So now let's get to something even more mind-boggling.
Well, actually, before you go to that, let me ask, how does this family, this 50 people, how do they survive? I mean, grow food, and if they're in the middle of the desert, it seems like
they are in the middle of the desert, exactly, and they cultivate of course, they cultivate their own fruits and vegetables. And of course, there is a back and forth from the nearest oasis, which is it could be Khotan or Yutian in the southern Silk Road. Let's say 200 kilometers, more or less. There's a back and forth every week, sending stuff that they need. And of course, the central government, guess which is the most imponent, the highest, it's not even construction, the highest pole in the village is the pole with the Chinese flag.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the village. In the middle of everything is yellow and sandy around, but you have this big red thing over there, flying all the time.
Okay.
And they offered subsidies to the locals who didn't want to move. They told us that the youngest, they moved to some different oases, but the older people who decide to stay and start the bed and breakfast business, they get all sorts of subsidies from the provincial government. Now we're talking about the Xinjiang provincial government, not Beijing.
Right.
Right. So we are getting into one of the big themes of modernization of China. The boom of domestic tourism. it's something unimaginable because we're talking about caravans in every highway you can see everywhere, state of the art, brand new airports literally everywhere, even in small towns, and a collection of brand new hotels, most of them built within the last 2 years, which if they existed in Europe, and if you stayed in one of them, you would be paying 500, 600 euros a night.
Mhm.
They don't exist in Europe because everything is decrepit.
Right.
But they exist in China and they cost $60 a night, $70 a night, which is more than affordable for a family.
Yeah.
You're staying in a state-of-the-art hotel with a fantastic breakfast. Everything is electronic, you name it, with a view, big towers, illuminated at night, the whole thing, It's like you are in a Vegas casino. Outstanding. So this is part of the modernization of China. And then there are many other elements. I'm just throwing a few balls. It's something that we'll be talking about this over and over again. And in my columns, the first column I just wrote today, it's just an opening because there's so much. And to process all this information it is literally mine. It's too much information for 3 weeks, between 3 and 4 weeks of travel, in fact. Electrification and energy. When you get to Xinjiang, for instance, one of the most startling images, you leave from Urumqi, capital Xinjiang, 400 million people, a high-tech hub, the hub of the Belt and Road in Western China going to the Central Asian stands and to the rest of Asia. An ultra-modern city, which now has, when I saw it this time, my last time there was over 10 years ago, my jaw fell to the floor. Now they have 2 downtowns, full of towers, both downtown. You don't even know which downtown you are. And there's a gigantic highway, freeway, LA style, connecting both downtowns. Okay, so this is the capital, Xinjiang, a modern Chinese city, 4,000 kilometers away from Beijing. Okay, so then you take a super highway, obviously, because we wanted to visit some of the oases nearby. First thing that you notice, a forest of solar panels. Second thing, a forest of wind turbines. Third thing, gigantic solar power stations. When you see a solar power, it's fantastic. Now you see that pole with the sun coming, and you see the light for 100 kilometers away, you can still see the light everywhere. Wow. It's absolutely extraordinary. So another thing that I learned in detail, Xinjiang produces so much energy that they export to practically everywhere in China. So Xinjiang is the energy capital of the People's Republic, in fact. Not to mention that all the pipelines, the oil and gas, all the important ones from Turkmenistan, from Kazakhstan, and soon the power of Siberia, they arrive in Xinjiang. So it's the energy capital of the People's Republic of China, which would explain to a great deal the interest of our CIA MI6 friends in Xinjiang. Yeah. Because Xinjiang is the absolute, and the way, this is something that impressed me the most, and it would deserve a book all by itself. How socialism with Chinese characteristics developed their far west in a matter of only 2 decades. And now it's the region in China that grows the fastest, between 7 and 8% growth of GDP a year, compared to 5% to the rest of China. And is now becoming as modern as the eastern seaboard of China. And they achieved that in 2 decades.
Well, this really destroys this Western narrative about communism. Because if a communist society is going to be backwards, poor, the exact antithesis of antithesis of modern. It's backwards, and instead you're watching China transform itself, as you said, in 20 years,
Yes.
while the West continues this decline.
Well, yeah, yeah. I was making this comparison, Larry, like every 10 minutes on the road. I did something that I haven't done in ages. I ditched my smartphones and my laptop, literally. I decided not to follow anything because I was in total immersion. I only opened it the day I was talking to the judge because I knew the judge would ask me about something else.
Yeah. I watched that. That was great.
Exactly. So, and well, first of all, the West doesn't exist. The West disappears completely. And you are immersed into this frantic development in so many different levels. There are so many examples. One small example. We were in a mini oasis in the Southern Silk Road, and I was looking for jade. And our next oasis is the jade capital of the Southern Silk Road, Khotan. We were in Xi'an. And then I said, do they make jade here? I said, oh, yes, they do. There's a factory right across the street in the morning. Jenny, I asked Jenny at breakfast, Jenny, where's the jade? So Jenny, 10 minutes later, she took us to an amazing, ultra-modern jade processing factory where they do everything from mining to refining to carving, processing, and selling. They now dominate the whole chain of production, which is something that they never did before. You know what they did starting a few years ago? They sent graduates from their local university to the best jade centers in the world, some of them in Germany or in Japan. So they studied abroad, came back, and they are all in Yutian, and they developed this factory, which is now recognized all over China. We arrived in Kashgar. They have their branch in the old city of Kashgar, which is invaded by tourists from everywhere. If you don't go to their factory in this little oasis, you can buy their stuff in Kashgar, where every Chinese goes. So this is one example of modernization, of investment, of even small oases and towns developing at a level that is a level of a big city. And of course, Larry, the absolute essential element, the quality of the infrastructure. And this means everything, a circulation in this from city to city, from oasis to oasis, highways, electrification, Wi-Fi mostly everywhere. If you're using, of course, a Chinese SIM card, of course, if you're depending on VPN, it's a mess. But for instance, I had one phone with a Chinese SIM card, no problems at all. Whenever I tried to use my other phone via VPN, it was trouble. But that's normal. Very few Chinese use VPN, in fact. The quality of the highways, as I said, at the airports, of the hotels, you name it. And of course, all this organized in terms of we are finally receiving the tourist boom that we were expecting for a few years now. And it's happening now, especially now after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And especially now that whole Chinese families, when they look at the West, they say, are we going to spend a lot of money to go to those suicidal places in the West? No, let's invest here in our own country. Let's discover our own country. For instance, less than one Chinese has ever been to Xinjiang, and they're starting to go now. So when we arrived in Kashgar, Kashgar is the mecca of the ancient Silk Roads and to a certain extent of the New Silk Roads in the westernmost part of China. From Kashgar starts the Karakoram Highway.
Mm-hmm.
Crosses the China-Pakistan border and goes down Pakistan all the way to the Arabian Sea. So it's the start of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So the geoeconomic importance is immense. From Urumqi, and some go through Kashgar, all the trains coming from different parts of China that go to Central Asia and then keep going, and some of them go to Europe, to Hamburg or to Madrid. They stop in Urumqi and then at the Chinese border in Alashankou in the north before they cross to Kazakhstan. We're going to do this trip. It will be a second part of the documentary because there was no time to do it this time. But what we did was something very, very funny, Larry. So I was in Urumqi. I said, okay, let's go to the train station to see the trains leaving to Central Asia. So we go there at 11 at night. And guess what? There's nothing because all the trains have left during the day. And at night, the station is closed. There was one guy at the door. Everything was dark. And we said, oh, man, we fucked up big, big time. And the next day, we had to leave. So when we were coming back from the train station, guess what happens? A train loaded of cargo crosses in front of us. So probably this guy was the midnight train to Tajikistan, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, the one thing that strikes me is if you're starting to see Chinese families do tourist trips in China,
Yes.
that's the sign of a developing and healthy middle class.
But that's the key point. Exactly.
Yeah.
The official terminology, according once again to Xi Dada, moderately prosperous society. So what we saw during our and even before the first part of my trip it started in Xi'an. In Xi'an, in Dunhuang. Better yet, Dunhuang is a mecca of the ancient Silk Roads because they have the Mogao caves, which have the most extraordinary collection of Buddhist paintings and statuary in China, and one of the best in the world still preserved in these caves. There were people from all over China. It's a human traffic jam every day, according to one of the curators, from all over China, and they are discovering that for the first time. Whole families. So this is a moderately prosperous middle class in motion all across their country. And last week, for instance, was Golden Week. Until today, today is the 8th, the day we're talking, right?
Right.
Today is the end of the Golden Week was from 1 to 8. So last week we were still in Kashgar. We could not even walk in the bazaar at night, Larry. Literally. They opened the gates at 11 in the morning, more or less. They built a fake gate in front of Kashgar. Mm-hmm. We have to say that. There are the remains of the ancient fortress, but Chinese style, they had to turn it into some sort of Disneylandic paradise. So they built a fake gate, which is the official opening of the official entrance of the old city of Kashgar. So every morning there is a ceremony of half an hour with dances, a sword dance and all that. Very nice, by the way. And at 11 in the morning, they open the gates. So by noon, you cannot even walk. And that goes from noon to midnight. Literally, you know. So everybody during Golden Week, and in many cases, they were visiting Xinjiang for the first time. For instance, we bumped into a group of girls from Shandong province, which is in the eastern part of China. Their first time in Kashgar, the girls were loving it because this is another industry that is booming all over China for girls. You go to Xi'an, you go to the bell tower in Xi'an, you go to the sand dunes in Dunhuang, you go to the old city in Kashgar, you dress like a local princess. In the case of Kashgar, an Uyghur princess. So you rent the dress, you rent the makeup, you rent a photographer to stay with you and take 50 photos with a few retouches allowed, 20 retouches or so. And it costs you $60 for the whole day.
Huh.
which is pretty affordable.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we see zillions of girls doing that everywhere, So you see a TikTok, Bilibili, Instagram platform rotating all over the place, Fascinating. It's another sign of moderately prosperous society, right?
So how did China do this?
I'm
Because
sorry.
how did China do this? How does
Ah,
we're talking 53 years since
yes,
when Nixon arrives and they open up China, and by then I think maybe the literacy rate in China may have been like 60%, 70%
maximum.
back then. It was the cities were run down, not modern, and and remember they're communists, so they don't believe in capitalism. Except what we've witnessed is one of the most. I don't think there's anything in history that compares with this kind
No,
of economic turnaround.
Larry, it is in a history, and every economist. If we ask our friend Michael Hudson, for instance, he already talked about this in detail. It's for the first time in history, and with the speed that's absolutely unparalleled.
Mhm.
I remember very well arriving at Beijing train station in the winter of 1992. That was right before the end of the Soviet Union, where
Right.
I was doing a long Asia backpack trip. So when I arrived at the station in the winter of 1992, I thought, oh my God, this is the China of late 1950s. It had not changed much compared compared to the 1960s. It had not changed much. The way people dressed, the trains were very, very old. I was in a train that was very, very slow. It took me forever to go from Shanghai to Beijing. The architecture of the station hadn't changed since the 50s. Um, the look around was gray, dark, dark green and gray, and full of soot everywhere.
Yeah.
So you thought that you were in a time frame, and you were not in the early 90s. You were in the mid 60s or even the mid 80s. For instance, I had a brief stop in Beijing in 1985. And when all of us foreigners, we were forced to stay at the Beijing Hotel, which was the only place where foreigners could stay. And the Beijing Hotel at the time looked like a 1940s hotel, 1950s hotel.
Yeah.
There were only bicycles in the streets. There were no cars. In 1992, there were a few cars. They were all crimson Santanas. If I remember well, they were produced in Brazil still at that time. They were being exported to China. These were the only cars that you saw in Beijing 32, 33 years ago. Compare to what's going on today. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And Xinjiang, I remember Xinjiang very well 27 years ago, Larry. And this I had a beautiful experience in Kashgar. I had taken to our director of photography scenes that I shot in Kashgar 27 years ago.
Mhm.
During one of my first trips. I was with my wife at the time. We spent the day in the old market, and we shot everything in the old market, the old mosque at the first prayers at 5 in the morning, and all that. And when I was showing these images to him at our homestay, the girls at the homestay, they crowded up and they were fascinating looking at images of the city, but they were not even born when these images were shot. And Kashgar had the look of a medieval town at the time, 7 years ago. Now you get there, you have a mini metropolis, practically.
Yeah.
It used to be segregated. Another thing that is very important. In the late 90s, still, even in the early 2000s, the old city of Kashgar was like it has always been for over 1,000 years. Uyghur, very few Chinese, very, very poor, no pavements, etc. And on the other side, separated was the beginning of the Chinese city with a huge Mao statue in the People's Square, paved, trolleys, etc. Now you get there, everything is seamlessly integrated. It's one city, and the integration means Uyghurs, Huis, Chinese Muslims, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Mongols, Uyghurs, all together.
Yeah. Well, is it fair to say that the China's Belt and Road Initiative is China wants to do for countries in the global south what it has done for itself? In other words, to bring about this kind of economic transformation and modernization of societies.
This is what they are essentially proposing, Larry. Yes. They are not proposing to sell their model because they know that their model is unexportable.
Mhm.
But they can tell, for instance, countries in Africa, in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, they don't need it because here in Southeast Asia, they're developing very, very fast. And they started to develop even before China, at the time of the Asian tigers, in the 80s. But to Africa, to Latin America, they can say, look at what these things that we implemented here, and it worked. You can borrow from what we learned, and you can do it your way. We did it our way, and it worked. And it can work for you as well. So they are... Belt and Road is a way of proposing to the global south as a whole, look, this is a geoeconomic development project. And it's a development project that it's paying attention to your national interests and for the communal good. That's very, very, this notion of communal good. And when the Chinese come up with a concept like community of a shared future for mankind, it doesn't mean much in Western languages. In Chinese, it does, because community, shared future, and a global vision.
Mhm.
This is very, very Chinese. So this is the Chinese way of showing to the world that they have a mechanism to improve people's lives in terms of community spirit, communal life, sharing, and equanimity. So development can be, it applies to everybody. It's not exclusivist,
Who gets credit? Or is any particular individual or group of individuals given credit for this transformation that China has undergone over particularly the last 30 years?
Well, Larry, the party, of course. And you know that, the Communist Party of China is monolithic in several aspects. But at the same time, we know there are lots of divisions and clashes inside the different levels of the party. But they always keep, I would say it's a Maoist, Dengist approach, in fact, which is pay attention to the grassroots all the time. Listen to what the grassroots is saying or proposing, and meritocracy. Meritocracy is essential. If you're not a true meritocrat, you won't have a career at the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party. So, of course, there are purges on and off. We all know that. Of course, it's an immense organization, and the mind boggles how they organize themselves, in fact, and how they manage to organize not only the government of 1.4 billion people, but their interactions with the provincial governments, because these provinces, some of them are as powerful as Beijing. For instance, the province of Guangdong in the south that has Guangzhou, wow, it's an absolute powerhouse. And it's close to Hong Kong and Macau on top of it. Beijing, Tianjin, that area, wow, it's one of the top GDPs in the world. in itself. So, and a level of modernization that is absolutely mind-boggling. So, how do they do it in the long term? Central planning, long term. The 5-year plans, subsequent 5-year plans. They have already planned everything to 2035 at least.
Hmm.
So this means 3 subsequent 5-year plans since 2025. Since 2020, if I remember well. 2020, they were already thinking about 2035. Another example in high tech, when they came up with this idea of Made in China 2025, which was 10 years ago, way before Trump 1.0. Trump 1.0, they slapped their first tariffs on China in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right.
So 2000, the idea, okay, they planned for 10 years. They said, okay, in 10 years, we're going to arrive in 2025, if not as leaders, at least number 2 or number 3 in these 10 high-tech sectors. What's happening now? They are leaders in 7, perhaps 8, and
Right.
soon they will be leaders in 10. How do you do that? Central planning, meritocracy, enticing your best minds to stay in China. So you're not going to go to MIT or Silicon Valley, make a career in the US and never come back to China. No, you can go there, study, go wherever, but you come back here and you develop high tech here in
Right.
Chinese soil, which explains, among other things, the success of Huawei, of DeepSeek, you name it. They left and they came back.
Right. Well,
And now they're even prouder of being Chinese, because when they see the actual fruits of the development in front of them every day,
Yeah.
of course. And this is something that we feel, Larry, in small details here and there, this sense of self-confidence, especially young Chinese people.
well, are you familiar with? There's a guy on YouTube, Kevin Walmsley. He does Inside China Business.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and one of the, he always shows this amazing side of China, just like what you're describing, that you see the modernization. But he also said that within this last 2 years, as the tensions with the United States have increased, the Chinese upper class that could afford to send their kids to schools in the United States are no longer sending them. They are keeping them at home. And in fact, those Chinese that have studied in the West, particularly in the United States, when they come back, they're actually unemployable, or they're having trouble finding jobs.
Unemployable, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I don't think most people here in the United States have caught up or captured, again, this fundamental change in the relationship, that China's through being subservient. China is through kowtowing to the West.
That's over. And well, for certain, I would say, strategic sectors of the American ruling classes, they will never admit that.
Yeah. No, I
It will
agree.
be immensely painful to admit that. But this is reality now. For instance, we don't need American universities. We have Tsinghua. Tsinghua is probably the number 1 scientific university in the world now. Not to mention the other ones.
Yeah.
Right? Huawei. Oh my God. I had a crash course on that trifold Huawei that turns into an iPad. But it's something absolutely mind-boggling. It's expensive. It costs $3,000, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth every bite of it. And the guy was wonderful. He said, I know, the problem is you really cannot use it in the West, and it's very risky. There is a trick. If we install one app, this app can, absorb the Western apps like Google and all that, but there's no guarantee that it will keep working. So But when you look at the technology, you see how much ahead of any crap that Apple is doing. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Even Xiaomi, the new Xiaomi Pro 17, when you compare it to the iPhone Pro 17, it's a joke. It's much, much better and fraction of the cost. The SUVs, Larry, is absolutely extraordinary. Not to mention the tank jeeps. If I lived there, I would buy a tank jeep. Definitely.
Yeah.
It's small, compact, very, very powerful, maneuverability excellent, super price, and it's no wonder they are kicking the Japanese out of the market.
Dude, I don't know if I've seen them in Moscow, but I guess they are exporting them to Moscow now, right?
Yes, the Russians love the tank jeeps. Well, not to mention the luxury SUVs. No?
Yeah, yeah. So this, as you got farther west in China, they're not really paying much attention to what's going on with the international affairs.
No, absolutely. The feeling, Larry, is that the West not only disappears, but in many aspects does not even exist.
Mm-hmm.
It registers in a few brands. When you look at a Gucci shop somewhere, they're here. And they don't buy it anymore. Which is, for instance, I went to can you imagine? I am in Lanzhou, which is a tier 4 city. So I left the museum and I bumped into a super sleek high-tech mall, and all the shops of Western brands, they were totally empty. And when people were buying, they were buying Chinese brands.
Mm-hmm.
And Chinese brands of, let's say, mid-level, but excellent craftsmanship, very, very good prices. Some of them are ultra modern, everything, the logos, you name it, styles comparable to anything you find in the West. So they really don't need it anymore. And well, and when there are comments about the progressive suicide of Western civilization, this is something that I talked a little bit in Beijing and in Xi'an. They're puzzled. But they say, okay, but they're doing this to themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
We Chinese, we are taking care of ourselves. Look around you.
Well, and there's this attitude. I'm part of a group call every week, and I was on it yesterday. And this is with a bunch of, businessmen, investors, Wall Street guys, and there's sort of the general belief that in that group that China can't live without us. They're going to have to come around.
Do they still believe in that?
Yeah.
Wow,
that China's going to collapse anytime now. There's a few that push back against that, but just the attitude, the arrogance implicit. Now, I had some fun with, you remember Donald Trump in February where he said he's imposing all those tariffs and all the countries are lining up to kiss his ass.
Yes.
Well, I said he's had to go out and buy a big tube of chapstick because he's going to go see Xi, and he's going to be kissing Xi's ass because, well, the Chinese, part of this, they stopped buying soybeans from the United States.
Exactly.
And all these soybean farmers who voted for Donald Trump, they're going, we lost our market. We got to get that market. Tell Trump, get over there, get our market back. And I know this one guy who's I'll tell you his name offline, but he's a big commodities guy. And he goes, oh yeah, the Chinese, Trump's going to go over there. The Chinese they're going to get back into bed with us on this. And I'm going, no, they're not. Why the hell will they want to do business with us when they're now doing business with Brazil, and Brazil has more soybeans than we do anyway?
Absolutely.
I mean, and they're a member of BRICS.
Yeah.
And you may have seen that just today, I guess China now or India announced they're buying all their Russian oil, paying yuan.
paying in yuan. Coming from India, this is mega groundbreaking.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is part of the top level BRICS discussions that now they are having it constant. Practically every week they are on the phone.
Mhm.
Because they are, and this was one of the good things that Lula did. Lula, he was the instigator of, look, we have to get closer to each other and we have to discuss our concerted strategy vis-a-vis the tariff war. And it's working. It's working. It's working fine.
Yeah.
So what's left for them, Larry? War against Iran?
You know, the, I can't deny that there's a desire to do it, but there's one thing to have a desire. The other thing gets actually back to capability.
Exactly.
And you know, I said, yeah, there's a part of me that sort of hopes that Israel does it, not because I want to see anybody killed, but that would increase the chances that Israel would cease to exist as a country. And if it ceases to exist as a country, then we'll be done with all this genocide.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm sure there are some people with the IQ over room temperature in Tel Aviv who understand that, but because they are fanatics, they refuse to see reality. They are all fanatics with no exceptions, no exceptions. And the Iranians, the Persians, as we know, are extremely patient. They see everything in historical cycles.
Mm-hmm.
They are biding their time. And they know that if they are attacked, their response now is going to be no holds barred. Everybody knows, and everybody knows that in Tehran. That's why I'm dying to go to Tehran if I have the chance in the next few weeks.
And it seems that Iran learned some pretty important lessons from that 12-day war. And one of the most important lessons was we need to be better friends with China and Russia.
Of course. And they are one of the top BRICS. And, well, the relationship with Russia and China in the back channels apparently is extremely strong.
Mm-hmm.
So we cannot have access to what they are really exchanging.
Right.
Nobody's going to leak that. Forget it. Nobody's going to leak that. But it's there. And of course, diplomatically, they are making their moves, not only BRICS, but also within the SCO as well. So we can say to a certain extent that China and Russia, they have got Iran's back at many levels. We don't know the details, but many levels. So how, especially now that Russia-US relations are degrading again. Did you see Ryabkov, what he said?
Yeah.
Did you see what Ryabkov, our friend, said?
Overnight, in the last 24 hours.
Look, that's it. The momentum after Alaska, it's over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now with this whole Tomahawk saga, Putin himself said, look, if this happens, our relations are dead. Basically, our relations are dead again.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So is this beheading?
The United States, it's almost, it's like dealing with a meth addict or a heroin addict. We can't break the habit, and our actions are destroying ourselves.
Exactly. 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 So, okay, the only auspicious sign from this side, Eurasia, is this more sophisticated concert of Eurasian powers, and now including the other ones, BRICS, Brazil, etc. Now they're getting their act together, literally.
Mm-hmm.
But that may still be not enough, facing two serious problems. Number one, the out-of-control death cult in West Asia, which they think they have no limits.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, which is something that now that I'm back to follow in what's happening, I read Emmanuel Todd's post a few days ago, which is brilliant. Basically, he correctly is saying everything that I predicted in my book launched 2 years ago is happening. And it is. And that's how brilliant he is. He was the first guy who actually said flat out, the job of Donald Trump will be to manage the strategic defeat of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first one who actually said that in the book. And that's exactly what's happened. And obviously, Donald Trump cannot and does not know how to manage the strategic defeat of the United States.
Right.
And that explains this circumvolutions all the time, right?
Well, you talk about Chinese meritocracy, and Trump
Yes.
does not he's not surrounded by a meritocracy. He's surrounded by a sycophancy.
Sycophants, exactly. Exactly. You cannot have a real estate developer become a Bismarck from one day to another.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. All right, I've taken up more than an hour and 15 minutes of your time, brother.
Man, when we start talking, we could go for another 3.
Yeah, and we ought to
This
be
is
back.
my Uyghur mug. That's cool, isn't it? My mini Uyghur mug.
We'll have to get back to St. Petersburg and go back to that one
Oh,
restaurant.
you're gonna love it. It's a great time to be in Russia in October. It's not a winter yet. It's great.
Yeah. So, all right, my friend.
Have
Thanks.
a great trip, Larry. I wish I will be there with you, but give my best to all the gang.
All right, will do. Let me hit the end button here. Hey, thanks for watching. Pepe is a dear friend, a brother. We became fast friends at our first meeting back in December of 2023 in Moscow. What he has shared today about China, I hope, has opened your eyes to a new world that's out there and a new world that's emerging. I think we're at the dawn of a new era, economically, politically, militarily, and one that I think, unfortunately, the United States is going to not be part of or will be irrelevant as the years roll by. If you like this, hit the like and subscribe button, please. Share it with your friends. This has been Countercurrents. I'm Larry Johnson. Thanks for watching.